Every so often in the news, we'll see a story in which exotic animal pets are owned and then mistreated by their owners, or they escape and attack people. Whether it be lemurs, chimpanzees, or crocodiles, people are constantly trying to get their hands on these wild animals only to abuse them or let them go. If you all are anything like me, when you see these stories, you become angry, frustrated, mad at the world, and very sad. After hearing about some of these controversies, I've decided to do some more research into the topic of both exotic pet ownership and then their subsequent mistreatment. And after doing this research, I have come to the conclusion that exotic animals should not be kept as pets. Now, as college students, we're soon to be very independent and living on our own, and we'll need to make decisions such as, what kind of pet do I want to get? For this reason, I'm going to explain to you why you should not own an exotic animal pet and why they should not be owned in general. In order to do this, first off, I will explain what exactly an exotic animal pet is and then list some examples of their horrific mistreatment. Next, I will explain why these incidents of mistreatment and the overall ownership happen. Lastly, I will explain what we can do to prevent both the ownership of exotic animal pets and their subsequent mistreatment. So first off, to understand the mistreatment of these animals and why it's important, we need to know what an exotic pet is and how they're mistreated. Here's some examples of it. The U.S. Code of Federal Regulations defines an exotic animal pet as any animal that is not native to a foreign country, is not native to the U.S., or was introduced from abroad. Includes, but not limited to, lions, tigers, elephants, leopards, kangaroos, and anteaters. So, according to U.S. law, I think the main thing to take away here is that legally, an exotic animal pet is any animal that's not from the U.S. or is brought in to be bred here. This is a good definition, but we need some more definitions to back it up. Some general practice veterinarians define an exotic pet as any pet that is not a dog, cat, or farm animal because they cannot take care of it. They need that animal to be taken to either a specialist in the field that it is herding in or a specialist in that animal specifically. The National Humane Education Society defines an exotic pet as any wild species kept for human pleasure or companionship. I think the two takeaways from this definition are the word wild and then pleasure and companionship. It's not an animal that's being used for a purpose, such as a farm animal like a cow or a chicken. It's an animal that is being kept for pleasure and companionship. So compiling these definitions, I think we should assume that an exotic animal pet is a pet that is not a traditional pet, is not U.S. native, requires a special vet, or is kept for pleasure or companionship, not usefulness. So now that we know what an exotic pet is, we can look into some of the examples of their mistreatment. In December of 2018 in Seminole County, Florida, a man was pulled over because his trailer on the back of his truck was dragging on the ground and causing sparks to fly everywhere. So the police decided to pull him over and investigate the situation. While they were talking to him, however, a lemur climbed out of the back of his trailer and started to play with the officers. So the officers investigated the trailer, and they also found in there a goat, tortoise, a parrot, and a wallaby that had 2 broken legs and could hardly walk and support itself. It couldn't walk and support itself. They then investigated the man's home. It had over 140 exotic wild animals in it, including a donkey, an emu, and a llama, and just countless others. The interesting thing about this case was that 5 years earlier in 2013, the man was actually put on probation for animal abuse, and he was not even allowed to own any pet, let alone an already illegal exotic one. In October of 2018, a Pennsylvania man's house was investigated because there were suspicions he had some animals in there, but it was nothing like what they actually found. In the first home, investigators found ferrets, parrots, boxes full of pythons, 5-foot-high boxes full of pythons, and even a crocodile. Just 240 animals stuffed in this man's small townhouse. They investigated another one of his properties. They found around 50 more animals, including more of the same types. Lizards, emus, there were lizards, emus, tortoises, and many pigs in this one. And the pigs, which were again kept for pleasure, not for farming purposes, their excrement was everywhere. It killed much of the animals in most houses, and some of the animals in these houses even ate each other. So now that we know these examples, we can use the examples themselves to explain why both the exotic pet ownership and mistreatment happens. One issue with exotic pet ownership is that these animals are not difficult to obtain. This is shown in the Florida case, in which the man was already on probation for animal abuse, yet he was still able to get his hands on 150 or so exotic animals, and this is not right and is a key problem. Another issue is that there's a lack of enforcement of our already current laws. There are laws that limit exotic pet ownership. The problem is they're not enforced soon enough. This is evident again in the Florida case, in which the man owned 150 animals while on probation from being able to own any animals at all, let alone already illegal ones. And then the last thing would just be a lack of social pressure and a disregard for the mistreatment of these animals. Oftentimes, we look at owning a lion or a tiger as cool when it's really just flat out wrong. And this is shown in the Pennsylvania case, in which the man was able to collect over 300 wild animals before being caught. There had to be people that knew about the scenario and didn't report it. And this lack of social pressure is a key issue as to why both exotic animal ownership and mistreatment is happening. So now that we know the causes of exotic pet mistreatment, what can we exactly do to prevent both the ownership and mistreatment of these animals? First off, we can use our legislative power as U.S. citizens. We can put people in power that will help fight for animal rights. Born Free USA, which is an organization that is all about animal rights. According to Born Free USA, an animal rights organization, states have different laws, depending on what state you live in, about how you can own exotic pet ownership and if you can. For example, in Indiana, you can for some animals, but it does require a permit. So we can use our voting power to elect people that will better enforce these laws and more harshly punish the people that violate them. Or we could just elect people that will help pass more laws, more and better laws, and better people that will enforce these laws themselves. The second thing we can do is report exotic animal mistreatment when we see it. Because overall, not only is it bad for the animals, it is a safety issue for humans. Since 1990 in the United States, 1,160 incidents have occurred in which exotic animal pets attacked people, and 75 people have died from these incidents. This is a big issue, and if we see animals being mistreated, we should report it both for the safety of the animals and the people involved, including yourself. Lastly, and the most important key scenario for all of us in this situation is just to not do it ourselves. Michelle C. Hollins, who is a writer, a journalist, and an author who's written many books on the subject of exotic pet ownership and pet ownership in general, often talks about how these animals were not created to be owned by humans. It's nearly impossible for us to mimic their wild scenarios that they live in, because we are not God. We cannot recreate their wild natural habitat that they were created to live in. And it's flat out immoral to own them, and we should view it as such and not own them ourselves. So now that you know what an exotic pet is and examples of how they've been mistreated, you've also learned some of the causes of this mistreatment, and most importantly, you've learned what you can do to stop it. It was before and is now still a very well-educated room on the topic of exotic pet mistreatment. And I hope you can use this information to make the right decision to not own exotic pets and fight for the rights of animals. So in the future, when your son or daughter asks you for a lion cub or a chimpanzee to play with, just remember that a new puppy will probably make them just as happy.